Good afternoon. If you have not seen The Rise of Skywalker, please continue listening because I like the views and I like the likes. But seriously, if you have not seen The Rise of Skywalker, please turn off the video now, go see it, and then come back. This video is about what didn't make sense to me in The Rise of Skywalker. Now, I thought that The Rise of Skywalker was a good movie, but it was a poor end of the trilogy movie. And what I mean by that is that if it was just a standalone movie with nothing before or potentially after it, then I would think that it was a pretty good movie. But since there is a lot of history in the Star Wars world before the movie, and Disney will continue to add things after the movie, I thought that this movie just raises more questions than answers. And I think for the third movie in a trilogy, the ninth movie at the end of a saga, it did a very poor job of wrapping up and establishing plot points that have been created in the previous film. And part of those questions or failures of this movie to answer is what this video is about today. One of the questions that I have is that how did Ben become a Force ghost? Now, before I continue, I will be going into a lot of Star Wars history in order to rationalize why these issues were questions to me. And if you have answers to these questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. But the first question that I have is, how did Ben Solo become a Force ghost? Now, in the prequels and in the Clone War animated series, they pretty much established that in order to become a Force ghost, you have to be trained. Jedis do not naturally become Force ghosts. And the first Jedi to actually retain his consciousness was Qui-Gon Jinn, who was in The Phantom Menace. Now, he wasn't able to retain his body, but the amount of training that he was able to do allows him to retain his consciousness. He goes back in Revenge of the Sith and basically informs and instructs Yoda as to not only retain one's consciousness, but their physical form too. Yoda then goes and teaches Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is assumed goes on and teach Luke how to do this. And Obi-Wan also, through some, let's say, convenience, is able to relay that information to Anakin. Anakin also is able to become a Force ghost. Now, Luke goes on, and it can be assumed that he's able to teach Leia because The Rise of Skywalker does establish that Leia was basically at the end of her training. But then when it comes to Ben, and when he dies, he becomes a Force ghost. I am confused as to how or when or if Ben was ever trained in order to do this, because The Last Jedi established that Ben was not Luke's only apprentice. Luke was trying to rebuild the Jedi Order. There was a number of Padawans. Ben eventually turns, and therefore one can assume that they were all at the same level. And therefore, if Ben was able to become a Force ghost, why didn't any of the other Jedi or Padawans that Luke was teaching become Force ghosts? So I was pretty confused about that aspect, and that is a question that doesn't necessarily have to be answered, but it does pretty much bug me that the movie kind of broke continuity in that regard. But I am assuming that the Ben Solo comic book series or Disney or Abrams later on will answer that plot point in later on. The second question that I have is, how in the hell did Palpatine survive? Now, the movie just brushes it off by saying, hey, the dark side leads to things that some consider unnatural. But Palpatine was able to survive. Now, if he was just thrown down the tunnel and that was it, then I could say, okay, all right, I can kind of see him surviving. But he was thrown down the hole. And then the entire Death Star exploded. Now, this wasn't a minor explosion. This was a pretty major explosion to destroy something the size of a moon. And yet, Palpatine was able to survive. Now, I can let go a lot of things in fantasy, but him surviving seems like, yeah, that was kind of pushing it. Now, what I thought that they were going to do is that the Star Wars, or the Disney version of Star Wars comic, has established that Sith can't really live on after they've died, but they can kind of transfer their consciousness to an object, any object that they want. And then if a person comes into contact with that object, then the Sith consciousness takes over that person. And that's how I thought they were going to do it. That Palpatine has some type of object running around, someone finds it, they in essence become the new Palpatine. But Disney decided to go in a whole another direction. And I'm still confused as to how he was able to survive. Now, if someone can answer this question, let me know. But since Palpatine was a major, or has been established as the shadow leader in the entire trilogy, that is very important information that I think needs to be answered. Another question that I have is, how did C-3PO know the Sith language? And this is important because the prequels established that Anakin built C-3PO and that he programmed him. Now, he might not have programmed him with all 2 million languages, but he programmed him. Anakin was a kid. He was not a Jedi. He was not a Sith. And then he was eventually given to Padme. And then he was then given to Captain Antilles, and therefore his mind was wiped. And therefore, how would he have known the Sith language? Who programmed that into him? Now, having thought about it, I was thinking that, well, maybe Anakin as a Jedi was able to program him. But then, if that was the case, wouldn't Rey know the Sith language? And apparently she didn't. And therefore, I'm just confused as to how C-3PO even knew the language. Nothing in the previous movies established that C-3PO even had access to such information. And given that C-3PO interpreting the Sith dagger is a major plot point, that is a question that should be answered. It just left me confused throughout the movie. It took me out of the movie because I was sitting there thinking, okay, C-3PO knows, 6 million forms of communication? 2 million? I'm not sure. He knows a lot. And I do not know who programmed him knowing Sith language. Again, if anyone can answer this question, let me know. The fourth question that I have is, why even look for Luke in the first place? Now, in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, it was kind of established that Luke was the last Jedi. And Leia, or it was hinted at that Leia had some Force training, but she wasn't a Jedi. In The Rise of Skywalker, even though now I'm wondering how come Luke couldn't finish Rey's training, they established that Leia basically continued to train Rey. Leia in conjunction with the old Jedi text. And the film also established that Leia was pretty much a Jedi. Luke explained to Rey that Leia was basically on the last day. So even if she didn't become officially a Jedi, she basically completed the course and is basically has all the information. If that was the case, why did they look for Luke then? Because Leia could do everything Luke could do, as far as I can understand. So why look for Luke? They could have just used Leia. That confused me. And I'm like, okay, did they just ruin a plot point from the previous films? I'm just confused. And if someone can answer these questions, again, you can put them in the comments, because I am outright confused. Now, I'm going to close by saying I have more questions, and I will be posting them in another video. But if you like this video, or you have any comments, or if you didn't like this video, please leave them in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will be back with more Star Wars info later.